I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a name known widely across America today. He dreamt of ridding segregation in America, of equal rights for African Americans, of a better future, of freedom in this country. Martin, originally named Michael Luther King Jr., was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, America. His father was a well-respected preacher, which meant that he grew up with a strong Christian faith. His family also included his mother, Alberta, his older sister, Christine, and his younger brother, Alfred. He graduated high school at age 15 and entered Morehouse College shortly thereafter. Later in life, Martin decided to become a Baptist pastor. At Kreutzer College in Pennsylvania, Martin studied Gandhi and his nonviolence techniques to fight for Indian independence from Britain. This inspired Martin to use his public speaking skills and Gandhi's nonviolence techniques to fight for fair rights for African American people. In 1953, Martin married a woman named Coretta Scott. They were married 15 years and had 4 kids. They had 2 daughters named Yolanda and Bernice, and 2 sons named Martin Luther III and Dexter Scott. Martin finished at Kreutzer College at the top of his class, and by 1955 he was a pastor of a church in Montgomery, Alabama. During this, though, segregation was growing. Everything was based on the color of one's skin. Everything separated black people from white people, even in theaters and restaurants. Even little things like water fountains, too. Segregated buses often caused trouble. But it wasn't until the arrest of a woman named Rosa Parks that black people decided to take action. African Americans planned a boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and they all stopped riding buses and walked everywhere.
That was the day that we started a bus protest which literally electrified the nation. And that was the day when we decided that we were not going to take segregated buses any longer. And you know, when we planned the bus boycott, we said if we could just get about 50 or 60% of the Negroes of Montgomery not to ride buses, this would be an effective boycott.
The Montgomery Improvement Association coordinated the boycott, and its president, Martin Luther King, became a prominent civil rights leader as international attention focused on Montgomery. However, 2 months after the boycott began, city authorities discovered an obscure law that banned boycotts. Martin Luther King was arrested and fined. But the day after his trial, the government passed a new law regarding the buses. And Martin, along with other African Americans, boarded the very first integrated bus. This event showed how Martin wanted to fight for equal rights, despite any consequences, even as large as jail time. This reveals his great leadership because he didn't let any obstacles get in the way of fighting for rights of African Americans in the U.S. In 1957 and 1958, Martin Luther King Jr. made a total of 208 speeches. He even wrote a book. It was called Stride Towards Freedom, The Montgomery Story, in order to let America hear his side of the story. On September 20th, 1958, at age 29, he was in Blumstein's department store in Harlem, signing copies of his book. Isola Curry, a well-dressed 42-year-old woman, approached the Reverend and asked if it was really him. When he replied yes, she said, "I've been looking for you for 5 years," and she plunged a letter opener into his chest. When police arrived on the scene, they found the civil rights leader sitting in a chair with the letter opener's ivory handle still protruding just below his collar. Fearful of the blade's proximity to King's heart, white officer Al Howard warned him, "Don't sneeze, don't even speak." Luckily, the icon underwent surgery almost immediately and survived the stabbing. Later in time, Martin Luther King visited India to study nonviolence techniques, and he eventually joined his father as co-pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. In 1963, King is arrested and jailed during an anti-segregation protest in Birmingham. King wrote letters from Birmingham City Jail arguing that individuals have the moral duty to disobey unjust laws.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice.
On August 28, 1963, more than 200,000 Americans gathered in Washington, D.C. for a political rally known as the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Coordinated by a number of civil rights and religious groups, the event was designed to shed light on the political and social challenges African Americans continued to face across the country. The march became a key moment in the growing struggle for civil rights in the United States, and it culminated in Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, a spirited call for racial justice and equality. What surprised many was the fact that the marchers protested with nonviolence techniques. They chose to sing songs of freedom instead of beating up officials with brute force. That day, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech that many would still remember in the future. It was called I Have a Dream.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
A year after the march in 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation in public accommodations and discrimination in education and employment. That same year, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize for his heroic and courageous acts against segregation. Just 4 years after, in 1968, King was shot and killed in Memphis. White man James Earl Ray was convicted of the assassination. Although Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is no longer with us, his legacy still lives on today. He is honored with his own U.S. national holiday, with multiple schools, and with a memorial in Washington, D.C. In all, King showed great leadership by protesting with nonviolence techniques against segregation during the Civil Rights Movement. And his legacy is honored today with the fulfillment of the freedom and fair rights that he one day wished for.